This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your daily recap of the information that affects Iowa's farmers, producers, and consumers, right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning broadcast team of Dustin Hoffman, Riley Smith, and Mark Magnuson. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Mark Magnuson.
Hello and welcome to Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Mark Magnuson. Today is Monday, May 20th, 2024. We're so glad you can join us for today's show. And today, a very special episode. It is episode 500. You heard that right. We could go into syndication 5 times over here at the network, should we so choose, but only joking. But thank you for joining us for today's show. We appreciate everyone for sticking with us over this journey for the past few years. I know it's something that Riley and Dustin got started. I was glad to join at about episode 80, and now here we are today in episode 500. In today's show, we will hear from Bill Even and Brett Kaysen of the National Pork Board. But first, let's take a look at the closing markets.
It's time now for the Ag Matters PM Closing Market Summary, your source for market analysis and settlement prices from the day's trade in Chicago, courtesy of the folks at agmarket.net.
At the end of another trading day, we are joined by Robin Schmahl of agmarket.net. Robin, at midday, we had green almost across the market board. Is that how we closed today?
Yes, we did close strong today. Backed off a little bit in the soybeans and corn, but wheat carrying the ball, if you want to use that term, leading the charge. 35 cents or more higher, depending on the contract and depending if it's Chicago or Kansas City. That was really the strong one. That was the focus today by much of the grain markets, because they do kind of work together. Wheat generally a lot of times supports the corn market or vice versa, but sometimes they do diverge. But when we saw over the weekend was frost in the Ukraine, again, Ukraine's had a couple of those, but they had some frost in the Ukraine, northern and eastern regions over the weekend. That's expected to reduce production at this point in time. Now, APK and Inform out of that regions, they say 20 to 30% of yield could be lost, not just in the wheat, but some of their other barley and some of their other grains that they grow there. But yet the ag minister for Ukraine, right now he's leaving the crop forecast unchanged. And I know wheat is hard to kill. I mean, there can always be a lot of reaction off of things like that happen, but there will be adjustments made after a while. But that's really got the push going into the wheat market today. That's just really surprising, but not really surprising based off of that. Now, we did have some severe weather in the Great Plains also that could impact our crop ratings for winter wheat when we come out, not maybe this week, but possibly the following week. So there's a couple of things going on that have gotten some of the traders excited about what could happen. Now, export inspections really weren't an issue today because the market seemed to look past that, looked at some of these other things that were taking place. Corn inspections were 47.7 million bushels. That was up 8.1 million bushels from last week. Now, soybeans were 6.8 million bushels, down 9.1 million bushels from a week ago. So that was pretty substantial decline. And wheat was 7.6 million bushels, down 6.5 million bushels. So both wheat and corn inspections for shipping were not very good, but that didn't have any impact on the market really at all. Now, there's estimates that were put out for planting progress. Corn planting progress is expected at 67% up until Sunday. It's up 18% from last week and comparatively to 81% a year ago. Soybeans, 51%, up 16% from last week, compared to 66% a year ago. So we can definitely see we're running behind because of the variable rain events coming across, wetter weather, we're getting it in the ground, but some places are really struggling and are behind. But in theory, it's those delays don't have long-term impacts. Now, spring wheat 76% planted compared to 61 a week ago, and the last year at 64%. So that's doing very well. Now, the winter wheat crop condition is expected to be 51% good to excellent, up a percent from last week, comparative to 38% good to excellent a year ago. Now, the Farm Bill is making some progress, finally. We run through this every time it comes around. It's set for a markup session this week on Thursday. And if it passes that markup session, then it could possibly be moving on to the House of Representatives. So I don't know. That's an iffy thing because you still hear a lot of division in that between the Democrats and Republicans on that Farm Bill. So it'll be interesting to see if that doesn't move forward. Now, looking back at some of our exports, or ahead to some of our exports situation, China's imports in April of soybeans, nearly 70% of their imports came from Brazil. That's really significant. China's imports from Brazil are up 72% compared to the same period last year, which was the first 4 months of the year. So they're really putting a lot of focus on getting their stuff from Brazil rather than the U.S. Now, U.S. exports were up in April. They were up 44% from a year ago to China, but the scale of metric tons is so much different. So it really doesn't amount to a whole lot, but anything helps. And the other thing underpinning the soybean market, rather than maybe some delayed planting, has been some of the weather problems they've been having in South America with some of the flooding and the difference in Argentina between the areas that are very dry and the areas that are very wet. So again, a lot of different things taking place, but the potential for us losing continued more market share of China is really, an issue that we have to be aware of.
So we had those gains in the grain commodities today. Did the livestock side of the market follow suit?
Well, they tried. Cattle tried to extend some of the gains, but really basically more. Some of the high grain prices, the corn price probably had an issue, put a little pressure on the market. We did have some strong cash trade last week, $2 to $5 higher, $2 higher in the south, $5 in the northern dressed. So that was really positive. But now sending those sites higher again this week is going to be an issue. And I think that's where traders are probably going to back off and take a look at. Plus, we have cattle on feed report, coming out on Friday, but that's way too early to tell what's going to go on there. But we made some strong gains last week. So that's it's positive. I mean, we've basically gone through resistance levels. We're in essence turned the market higher. And that's real positive. Now, box beef at midday, choice was up 80 cents, select up $3.95. Box beef was really strong last week. Looks to maybe continue that. But on the other side, there was good news in the second test of the H5N1 virus, where they were going to cook beef that was injected with the virus and see how it was going to react. And they did 3 different temperature levels, showed the virus was killed with no virus prevalent. Even in the low heat category, it killed the virus, but there was a little bit more of the matter, I guess, prevalent in there. So that's really good news. So 2 of the tests now have been positive for beef. There's one more test where they're going to actually look at cull cows and look at the muscle tissue to see if any of it's present in there. So that's good news for the beef industry. On the hogs continue to struggle. I mean, we had struggled last week, all week. Their perception remains of weaker demand coming through the summer time frame. Midday cash was unavailable today. So It seems to be a normal thing now lately that we can't get midday cash on Mondays. Cutouts were up just 22 cents, so that really didn't provide a lot of support to the market. Hogs were struggling with mixed close today. The summer contract or going into the July contract closed below $100. Hasn't been down in that area basically since February. So that market really needs a lot of help. I would think that we would see some stronger demand coming through the Memorial weekend, and we may not see evidence of that until after the weekend, where beef seems to be capitalizing on that ahead of the weekend. So that we need to see. We need to see consistent cash prices higher. We need to see consistent cutouts. But that needs to materialize. You have to see some support under that market.
Robin, thanks so much for the time here today. What is the best way for our viewers to get in touch for more marketing information?
They can call me directly at 877-256-3253 or go to the website, agmarket.net. There's information on there. Our phone number, the 844 number is on there. Feel free to email or call in, and somebody will get back to you.
Robin Schmahl of agmarket.net, our guest here today. Thank you for the time and have a great rest of your week.
All right. Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you to Robin Schmahl of agmarket.net for our closing market summary. Let's turn now to the closing numbers, which can be found under the markets tab of our website at iowaagnet.com. July corn closes up 8 even at $4.60 July soybeans up 20 even at $12.48 even. July soybean meal up $5.30 at $3.74.10. July soybean oil up $1.05 at $46.32. Chicago wheat up 37.5 at $6.88 3/4. Minneapolis wheat up 27 3/4 at $7.39 1/4. Kansas City hard red wheat up 35 even at $6.96 3/4. July oats up 3/4 cent at $3.65 3/4. On the Merc, June live cattle up 43 cents at $181.48. August feeder cattle down $1.38 at $258.48. June lean hogs up 43 cents at $96.93. June pork cut out unchanged at $103.50. And Class 3 milk down 27 cents at $21.19. That is our ag market coverage for today. It is time now to hear from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soybean Checkoff. Up next, it is Bill Even and Brett Kaysen of the National Pork Board. This is Ag Matters PM.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com. You're watching Ag Matters PM on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and it is time now for our conversation with Bill Even and Brett Kaysen of the National Pork Board. Mark Magnuson for the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and I'm joined today by Bill Even. He is CEO of the National Pork Board, and also Brett Kaysen, the Vice President of Producer and State Engagement with the National Pork Board. And Bill, here on the show today, wanted to ask you, seen a lot of change in the pork industry over the past few years. Could you explain just kind of what that's meant for the entire pork industry?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for allowing us to visit with you and your guests today. I would start off with an old saying that change is inevitable, but adaptation and survival are optional. And I know on our farm back in South Dakota, it doesn't look the same as it did for when my dad was running, or my grandfather, or my great-grandfather. But my brother and my son and I now adapted to many of those changes. And so that's exactly what the U.S. pork industry and the pork checkoff is doing today. So one of the main takeaways is that among younger generations, fresh pork consumption is starting to decline. And the good news, however, is that decline is reversible. And that's what the checkoff is here to work on today. And the main takeaway from that is our new Consumer Connect platform and a groundbreaking scale research that we've never done before to understand consumers at a really granular level and meet them where they're at with questions they have about food in general, pork in particular, or how we're raising the pigs. Because at the end of the day, this is not about what we want to tell them. This is about us going and listening to those consumers, then providing them with that information about the product or about the industry necessary to make them feel really good about incorporating pork as part of their diet, and particularly the younger generations.
And Brett, that point that Bill just made is something we've talked a lot with, I think, a lot of commodity groups in recent years. And that is, yes, things may change. There might be new regulations, whatever it may be that affects the industry. But at the end of the day, you need to do what the consumer wants, what they're looking for in terms of purchasing products. And so how does that work with the research that you've been able to do, the research you're continuing to do of trying to look towards that long-term demand?
Yes, this is definitely a long-term consumer strategy, and change is inevitable, as Bill said earlier. But what I would say is we have more data and resources than we've ever had at our fingertips to actually get inside the minds and the hearts of the modern day eater. And that's what I really enjoy about this work, is that as the generations change from younger and as they move older and or they change in terms of their location, the part of the country, or your demographic ethnically, we are going to speak directly to you about the relevance of pork. And those are data-based decisions. We know more about the modern day pork eater than we've ever known in the history of the pork industry. And this is a pivotal point for our industry in which we can create relevance for those individual consumers that we have broken down through 7 different segments through this Consumer Connect work that makes us more effective and more efficient to create a pull through for this amazing thing called pork, the protein of choice, as I like to say.
So Bill, as Brett said there, it's a pivotal time for the hog industry and trying to make sure you're connecting with that future consumer, which is the younger person. And so when you look at that and you think about the things that younger people need to know about pork and what they need to know about what they're buying in the store, what are those important connections to make?
So one of the things that I think is important for everybody to know, and very obvious to pork producers themselves, we've come through some really tough financial times here over the past couple of years. And my father always said, a good farmer has a pliers, a jackknife, and a tape measure. Use the tape measure to measure where you're at and what's going on. You use the jackknife to cut off things that you don't need to do anymore. And you've got the pliers to grab onto the things of where you're going next. And that's really what Consumer Connect is about. It's the tape measure, the tool that we're using to look at those consumers, both from an age range, where they're at in their family size, where they're at geographically, where they're at demographically. And the ability to then connect to them and be relevant to them and where they're at today is really that tape measure that we now have. So the work in front of us, frankly, Mark, is going to be now taking the jackknife to cut away the things that the checkoff might have been doing before that we recognize, that might have worked in the earlier 2000s. We need to go in a different direction. And then that pliers is be able to grab onto those things and say, you know what, here's what we really know, and here's how we show up with the consumer of tomorrow. And many of those are the younger consumers that think about pork as an ingredient rather than a center of the plate cut. And so developing new recipes, having new nutritional information available to them is how we need to engage. And this tool is going to help us then determine what sort of consumer marketing outreach that we're going to be doing on a go-forward basis. And our 15-member farmer board will be all part of that.
So Brett, when it comes to the research that NPB has been able to do to this point or is still working on right now, what are some of those things? Have you been able to see tangible results of the things that younger consumers are looking for and what they expect from the pork industry?
We absolutely have. And I'll give you a tangible example of the popularity and the growth of ground pork as a product. That all stemmed from this data analysis and some of this Consumer Connect work in which some of our consumers say, hey, I want to think about pork as an ingredient and not center of plate. And so my generation, the way I was raised is we always thought about a pork chop center of plate with a protein. Our younger generations don't necessarily think that way. They think about protein on the go. They think about versatility. They think about heat and eat. And so several years ago, the National Pork Board took these data analytics, put together a playbook around ground pork, and realized there's a business opportunity here, and worked with several packers and processors and retailers to show them that playbook that we believe that ground pork has a play here to scale your business and ultimately then helps the American pig farmer. And so there's one tangible example with ground pork, how we've utilized it as an ingredient and proven its health and wellness and versatility for the modern day eater. that everybody wins in the supply chain. And so one tangible example, and I can see many more coming out of this Consumer Connect work, similar to the ground pork work.
So, Bill, with everything that we've talked about here today, trying to connect with the next wave of consumers of pork, the younger generation as they continue to grow up and continue to consume pork. But what is the main takeaway then for producers and what they should be thinking about as it relates to what we've talked about today?
Main takeaway for the American pork producer is that while the baby boomers and Generation X that I'm part of have really been a real stable source of our demand, when you look at the millennials and you look at the Gen Z, fresh pork is not as frequent in their selection set. They're eating protein. And so we've got to figure out, how do we reach them where they're at today? And so this fresh pork play is going to have a lot to do with innovation. And as Brett had indicated, we need to make sure that we're providing these younger consumers with on-the-go products that are relevant to them. Because let's face it, folks, people want to eat something that has taste and flavor and is convenient. And these on-the-go generations are expecting that. We need to show up in the U.S. pork industry with those type of products. That's the sort of work that your Pork Checkoff is working on going forward.
And then, Brett, is there anything else you'd like to let our viewers, our listeners know about when it comes to this hard work that's being put in by the MPB?
I would say the National Pork Board, under the Act and Order, has had a responsibility and an obligation to do domestic and international marketing since the inception of the checkoff. But personally and professionally, I can tell you on the domestic side, I've never been more excited about this work. And the work we've done in the past has been phenomenal. But the data, the insights, the facts, and the science behind how we talk to the modern day eater is second to none. And so taking those insights and put them into action and see what it's going to do from a volume and value perspective relative to the pork category, and ultimately come back to our farmers on the farm and see that value. It's exciting times ahead. It's going to be hard. It isn't going to be easy. There's a short-term and long-term play, but it's exciting times. I ask that everybody gets as excited about it as I am and get the momentum moving forward.
So I'd like to thank our guest here today, Bill Evans, CEO of the National Pork Board. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks very much, Mark. Very much appreciated.
And then Brett Kaysen, Vice President of Producer and State Engagement. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed this greatly.
Thank you to Bill Even and Brett Kaysen for joining today's show. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. You can find all of our content on our website at iowaagnet.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and TikTok. And you can find our video content and previous episodes of AM/PM on our YouTube channel. Don't forget as well our free morning, midday, and closing market podcasts, which are found on Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and Podbean. From the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network studios in Des Moines, I'm Mark Magnuson. On behalf of Riley Smith, Dustin Huffman, and Andy Peterson, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.